Please, let's do it. I have been listening to and researching a lot about this topic called the Meadow Project. The Meadow Project is the title of a book, an audio book that talks about this place somewhere in the South that is supposed to be the Skinwalker Ranch of the South. Now, initially I heard about it through our Discord, which way, by the way, people can join by hopping on the Patreon or donating through PayPal. And someone posted it up there a few months ago. Hey, Mike, have you checked out this thing, the Meadow Project? And I didn't have time to look at it. But then it started to come back into my purview, and I started to research it a little bit. I downloaded the audiobook, started combing through everything. Now, in this book, the author is very guarded with the exact location of where this place is. Now, he says it's a hotspot of paranormal activity, ranging from UFOs, Bigfoot sightings, just a whole host of things. The same kind of anomalies that you hear about on Skinwalker Ranch. But during the book, he did reference a lot of historical UFO events, and I was able to cross-reference some of the stuff that I have on Kindle, some of my personal books, and I pretty much have this place narrowed down. Even though he claims that if you want to visit the ranch, or not this ranch, but this plot, I will say, this plot of 5 to 10 acres, which I believe is on state property, you have to sign an NDA, and you can go out there, you can do your own investigations. But you can't disclose the location of this to anybody because he doesn't want a bunch of local yokels coming out there.
Yahoos.
Bunch of yahoos mucking up the works. And I completely understand his thought process behind that, because if the location was to get out there, you'd get crazy people out there with their ghost machines and out there in their wizard robes trying to channel these spirits. Skinwalker Ranch is guarded. They have armed guards. It's fenced off. Fairly hard to get in there. This place, I believe, it is on state property. He didn't say as much, but I managed to pinpoint this location. Well, not pinpoint. I managed to narrow it down to pretty much the northeastern corner of Alabama. And I have a better idea of exactly where this location is, but I'm not going to say. It's just a guess. My general guess, I'm like 75% sure it is northeastern corner of Alabama. Where I pinpointed it to, I'm about 50-50 on at this point. But it's a fascinating tale that this team of researchers just kind of stumbled across this hotspot of paranormal activity, and they decided to bring in some additional help to fully investigate this. Now, the author has a background in, I believe, Army intelligence. He's worked for the Defense Department. One of his buddies also has a military background. And then the other people that they recruited to come on this property with them to document their experiences come from a wide range of backgrounds. A person was really into investigating Bigfoot. Didn't investigate UFOs. He just investigated Bigfoot. Then they had a person that was really into investigating ghosts and the paranormal and poltergeist. Another person really into UFOs. So it was almost like an 8 to 9 person group with a mixed background. And at the core were people that were fairly skilled, or at least trained military tactics, intelligence, and using some of this equipment like forward-looking infrared, night vision, and they had some pretty good equipment along the way. And so they throughout the book, it goes into the history of this region, some of the weird paranormal experiences that people in this part of the country have experienced. And he tells tales from people from Georgia, he doesn't mention Alabama, but I suspect that's where it came from. That's where I was able to pinpoint some of these stories. And it goes on to say that a lot of people in this area did even have sightings of strange, tall, Bigfoot-type creatures while they were out picking berries, which is something that does happen in the missing 411 profile point, where a lot of times when people go missing, they're out there picking huckleberries, maybe even blueberries. It is one of those things that does happen. Now, while they're out there, they're out on this property multiple days at a time. They have a campsite, and then they will actually hike in to the hotspot of paranormal activity. And they have some pretty advanced equipment. They all have forward-looking infrared. They have radiation detectors. They have a CB radio, shortwave radio for communication over longer distance. Spirit boxes for supposedly communicating with the unseen or the dead. Just all your ghost-busting gadgets that you could want, they got them. And on one night, they were traveling through the wooded areas here, and they said they like to travel to this area. For the most part, they like to go to this area when it is winter, because they said there's less leaves, there's less obstruction of view, and so that's why they like to go out there, which led me to believe it's probably northern Alabama, because I don't know how much of the seasons really change, like how much like leaf loss there is down in southern Alabama or like the southern part of the states. I would say not much, but maybe up in the north there's a little bit more of the season changing. And so on one such evening, their buddy Bob was walking along, and he was walking from a designated point, and they were in constant communication with him over CB. He had his equipment with him. He had his GPS tracker on, and he was just going to a location to see if he experienced anything. And then he didn't really. He made it to the marker, but he said he got to the marker faster than he anticipated. Like he just kind of zoned out, and he arrived at this marker that they agreed that he would be at. And he didn't really know how it happened. He may have just been daydreaming, but I pulled this little clip from the audiobook, and I got several clips here where they actually have, and I didn't see it, this is in the book, I haven't seen any of this evidence, but they claim to have FLIR footage of Bob turning into an orb and traversing the landscape, and then coming back into the shape of a human form through the forward-looking infrared that measures temperature. And so here is this little clip right here. It's about a minute and a half of Bob turning into an orb. Here we go.
Daryl started watching for Bob on his FLIR unit and detected him right away. Bob's man-shaped heat signature was obvious in the machine's eyepiece as he approached Daryl's position at the far end of the clearing. Then something extremely strange happened. As Daryl was observing Bob through the FLIR scope, he saw the human shape of Bob's body turn into a sphere of heat or energy detected and registered on the scope. To his astonishment, this sphere of energy that he assumed was still Bob appeared to move towards him, traveling about 300 feet in 8 seconds. This means Bob would have had to run that distance over rough ground in the dark at a speed greater than 25 miles an hour. This understandably rattled Daryl. When Bob finally reached his location, Daryl asked him how he felt. Bob replied he was fine. Why did he ask? Daryl explained what he had just witnessed. Bob stated that, from his vantage, nothing seemed odd or strange. Time flowed as it should, and nothing appeared to him out of the ordinary. Not long after this, Bob and Daryl heard a low chattering or deep mumbling from the ridgetop to the south. This extraordinary vocalization was also heard by Tim, Kristen, and me.
And they would hear a lot of that. They would hear a lot of weird sounds coming from the woods. And they had a full-on naturalist with them that could identify plants, identify various animal sounds that were supposedly native to that location. So if they heard like a bird, this guy was like, that's a blue jay. Hawk. He was good. And a lot of the sounds that they found to be weird, the naturalist would say, well, that's not something that I recognize, or that type of animal is not native to this part of the country. And they would hear that a lot. They went back to camp like after that, and they say, okay, this is all kind of weird. And during the night, they were woken up by like a stark white humanoid figure looking at them from around a tree. And they just found it to be kind of curious. They didn't have time to pick up their camera and take a picture. By the time they picked up their camera and tried to take a picture, it was gone. But there have been numerous sightings of other white humanoid kind of creatures from this area. Now, Bob did have his GPS tracking on. So the following day, after the encounter with the white creature, they said, hey, let's go ahead and check out your GPS to see what happened when it looked like you turned into an orb. And here's what they found.
The GPS track showed Bob having crossed the large creek several times, then making several trips in various straight lines many miles all around the Coal Springs campsite, and then returning to the meadow. You must realize that this is mountainous terrain, and it is not possible to travel in a straight line on foot or by vehicle. It just cannot be done. The only way Bob could have made this track was if he had been in some type of flying craft traversing the landscape overhead. Bob had this GPS on his person the entire night. Is this what happened during his missing time, or the transformation into an energy sphere? We spent Saturday mostly talking and exploring the nearby area.
Now, if people recall, I played a couple segments from Skinwalker Ranch Season 3 where they're also experiencing some weird GPS anomalies. And on that show, they're dropping the GPS out of a plane, and it appears to bounce off of something or go into the rocks itself and then reappear out on the other side, almost as if it went through some sort of portal or pathway that is not completely obvious to us humans. And they captured that a few different times. What they experienced here, Bob the Orb, they actually claimed to have footage of him transforming into an orb and then floating along or in some sort of conveyance to go over the terrain in a much quicker fashion, right around 25 miles an hour. Now, during this, I mean, that's pretty bizarre in and of itself, but during this, as they make their advancement into the meadow night after night, trip after trip, they pick up these FLIR signatures of these cubes. And they appear to be like 9 foot by 9 foot. And they don't really know what they are. Although, when one team approached an area where the cube was, the team disappeared for a little bit. And the team, I think a 2 or 3 person team that went near this cube, they said they almost had like tunnel vision where all the sound around them was deadened. They couldn't hear anything. The other team that was observing them said they lost track of them. They lost sight of them. They couldn't hear them anymore. They couldn't see them anymore. And any sort of communication they tried to make with them was lost. Any sort of audio cues, they tried to whistle, that kind of stuff, that was not heard. It was almost like they were in a cone of silence, and they were transported into some sort of dimensional pocket, some sort of holding place. But they said it looked relatively normal in there. It was easy to get into that meadow where that dimensional pocket was, but coming back out, they said it was much more difficult. Like there was much more heavy plant growth on the way out than on the way in. So they go back, they keep going back to this meadow over and over again. and they managed to capture some of these cubes through their forward-looking infrared and their all-spectrum cameras. And here's a little clip from that.
David decided to photograph the west end of the meadow in direct alignment with the tracks. David was using his full-spectrum camera, which detects and photographs ultraviolet, infrared, and visible light. In the viewfinder of the camera, David saw what appeared to be a cube 9 feet on each side. The box was not visible to the naked eye. Each time they brought the camera to eye level, the cube appeared. They moved a few yards to each side to see if it would affect the visibility of the phenomena. It was still there regardless of their position. David decided to photograph the box for further study, only to realize that he had forgotten to insert the SD card into the camera before departing camp.
Dumbass.
They decided to move closer. When they were within 100 yards of the cube, it disappeared. During this experience, David and Terry also reported hearing faint voices coming from deep in the forest. Boxes or cubes are not unheard of in areas of high strangeness. As mentioned before, the legendary Skinwalker Ranch in Utah has numerous reports of flying boxes with blinking lights. Famous UFO researcher Dr. Jacques Vallée went to Brazil in the 1980s to investigate reports of strange flying boxes that made odd humming sounds while moving through the air. In his book, Confrontations, A Scientist's Search for Alien Contact, he recounts the events in Paranormal, Brazil, where these box-shaped UFOs, known as chupas by the locals, would emit a beam or ray that had been known to kill or injure people on the ground.
I've also read reports of a different kind of box, but what they reference there is almost a refrigerator-sized box that they saw in the woods, but theirs was like 9 by 9. The ones on Skinwalker Ranch are pretty much the size of a refrigerator, and there are numerous reports of seeing it silhouetted, even against the moon, flying over the ranch, which is pretty ridiculous. If what they're conveying is true, and then what is seen on Skinwalker Ranch is true, then there's some sort of correlation here. They're experiencing much the same things. Now, I've read stories where people have encountered humanoids, almost elf-like creatures that are carrying a box. And in one such instance from a northern European country, 2 hikers were out. They encountered what they described was an elf-like entity. They approached him to see if he needed any help. This elf-like entity whipped around, had a box on the front of him, almost like he was holding it, and it emitted a ray at the 2 hikers, and it irradiated them, causing radiation burns and radiation poisoning on both the hikers. They were horribly sick for 2 days and had to get medical attention so they wouldn't die. So the box, the UFO box, the alien box is pretty consistent throughout a lot of niche UFO lore. But they're investigating it in relation to some sort of portal. And in the phenomenon, that cone of silence really resembles a lot of what people in Missing 411 profiles experience, where everything kind of goes quiet around you, and you can't hear the ambient sound of the forest anymore. You can't hear the birds chirping or anything else. You don't hear the wind. It's just a cone of silence. It's almost like you are taken to another place, and hopefully you can retrace your steps and get back out. Because a lot of times, if you're alone, that cannot happen, or it doesn't happen unless you're lucky. Now, they continue on with their investigation. They use some of the Dr. Stephen Greer's protocols, I think it's the CE5 protocols, where you get around in a group. You do basically a group meditation to try to bring in entities to say, hey, we're here. We want to party. Why don't you come say hi to us? They tried some of that, and they attracted some orbs. Some of the more interesting interactions from the book is when they decided to use a spirit box. And they went out to the meadow to try to communicate with whatever is out there. And the way they did this is that they had one person asking the question, and then the person who was listening to the spirit box was blindfolded, and they put I guess maybe ear suppression headphones over them, and then earbuds in so they could hear the spirit box. So I guess the philosophy of the spirit box is it flips through a lot of radio stations, and in the static, you can hear voices, and those voices are from beyond this realm. It could be dead ones, it could be aliens, different consciousnesses, whatever it is. But they were using that spirit box in that way, and they blindfolded the guy and put the earmuffs over him as to not give him visual cues or kind of taint his response in any way. And during those conversations, it seems like they were talking to someone who was responsible or using these cubes as a portal in some way and recognized that there is an energy spike. They didn't measure radiation spikes when these portals occur. Now, they didn't say what they were used for exactly, other than a means of conveyance. They didn't say who the person or the entity on the other side of the spirit box was very tight-lipped about how they operate. But they did this communication several times, and to some degree of success. I mean, as much success as you can have is flipping through radio stations, hoping to hear a voice and kind of piece it together. But it was fascinating to listen to. And then I have one last clip, and this is in reference to Missing 411, and they referenced this in the book. So here it is.
Laying all the facts in front of me, I was at a loss for an explanation. All of this made me think of several books in my library. I have several of the excellent Missing 411 books from the series by David Paulides. In the various books, Mr. Paulides describes the cases of people that have gone missing in America's wilderness and the strange circumstances surrounding those disappearances. He had identified several clusters of missing persons cases throughout the U.S. and had plotted them on a map of North America. The Meadow is located in one such cluster. If we had not had our protocols in place requiring teams to consist of at least 2 members and also requiring a radio, map, and compass and an open radio net when personnel are afield, could this have turned out differently? I wondered if a chapter in a future book of Mr. Paulides could have included my name if we had not taken these precautions. Thankfully, we will never know.
So, I mean, there's some correlation there, Missing 411 and this spot. And I did look at the Missing 411 map, and there does appear to be a cluster in that region. All of this reminds me of some weird stuff. The first thing, I was like, okay, you got Skinwalker Ranch, you got portals, you got orbs, you got weird, strange creatures, and they seem to be interacting with this portal. It reminds me of a game that I used to play growing up called Rifts. It is a role-playing game by Palladium Books, and the Rift is a dimensional rift in which demons, entities, magic users, dimensional beings come out, and they take over Earth, and some are good, some are bad. But they use these dimensional portals, and they're located on ley line nexuses. And the ley line thing is something that has been talked about a lot in spiritual circles, and it's supposed to be like a grid of energy that lays over this earth, and they intersect with one another, and at those intersections, they're called nexuses, or nexes. And at those joining sectors, the nexus, that's a point of power. Like one, for instance, is like Stonehenge. Another one could be this place, although I think this one is on the ley line and not necessarily a nexus point. Another one that could be on a ley line, Skinwalker Ranch. And if this ley line thing is true, well, then there should be a good explanation. They should know about this. The government, should know about this in order to harness it in some way. And I suspect that if it is true, then they are. There was a book written called The Energy Grid, Harmonic 695 by Bruce Cathy, who talked about this. It's a very dense book written by a former pilot, and it's chock full of formulas and calculations. And he talks about an energy grid over this planet. I'm digging through that book right now to see if anything can be gleaned from it. But it's very dense, and he talks about UFOs and how they use this grid for travel. I think he gets into portals a little bit, so I'll be getting into that. But there is the brief synopsis of the Meadow, its general location, and I will dig in to some of the more crazy stories from this region. And with that, maybe get some more understandings, have a better understanding of what's going on in Alabama. Because it does seem like a pretty crazy place. Beyond all the paranormal stuff, Alabama's pretty crazy. Oh, yes.
Did they catch those elves with the orbs? Did they catch one?
No, they didn't catch them. They had, are you talking about the one at the Meadow or the hikers in Europe?
Well, in the Meadow, where they watched the guy like turn into an orb, then they chase him down and beat him to
well, that was their friend. So they saw their friend Bob turn into an orb. He was out hiking. He was going to a spot to investigate, and on his way back to camp, they picked up his FLIR signature, but they picked up an orb. And so then they saw that orb transform into the shape of a man. It's all done through FLIR, so it was the shape of an orb and then the body heat signature of a man. So yeah, they talked to him. They got his GPS and everything. So it's fascinating, fascinating stuff. I don't know where they go from here. They would have to open it up to more researchers, I suppose, but then at that point you're kind of tainting it.
I think we need to get in that dimensional pocket and store some trash in there or something.
I think that you might be joking around, but that might be
that's what I'd do if I found
a solution.
Another dimension. I'd just start dumping things in there.
It might be a solution to a lot of problems in this world. For whatever reason, I've been watching a lot of shows about alternate parallel universes. One is Fringe. I'm going back and watching the Fringe series. And then there's a newer series on HBO called His Dark Material, which is about a parallel universe that people can go to.
Isn't that based on that terrible Golden Compass thing?
It's got a Golden Compass involved, but I don't know if it's based on the Golden Compass.
It's the same series, yeah. Where they have animal
Pullman?
spirits. And
is it Pullman? They have
Bill Pullman? Yeah.
No, I think the author is maybe named Pullman, but each one of the people in the alternate universe, not ours, the alternate one, they each have like an animal demon, an animal spirit guide, and that they go through life with their animal friends.
Yeah, that was a terrible movie. It was bad.
It's a series, so it's a series on HBO. So the Golden Compass movie might be bad. I don't know. I never saw it, but the series thus far, pretty good. I'm into that kind of stuff. I kind of like the alternate universe stuff, and I like wizardry and weird politics. So it's kind of got some little politics involved. It's got some wizardry, and it's got some animals too. I like it. It's a winner for me.
Give us an email at ourbigdumbmouth@gmail.com. Check out obdmpod.com for all the social media and donation links. Be a part of the magic.